Well, hi, everybody. If you're new with us, my name is Jason. I'm the lead pastor here at Journey of Faith, and a big hello to our Torrance campus that's meeting at Torrance High School. Hi to everybody we're joined together by video during this part of the service, and then hi to everybody that's online. This is our second week in our series called The Good Life. We're talking about what is the good life? It keeps eluding us. What is it that it takes to live the good life? And so what we're doing is we're looking at the teachings of Jesus. And what did Jesus say about life and about the life that he is offering and providing to us? Last week, we started our first message by looking at this really powerful quote from Jesus. Here's what he said. He said, "My purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life." He's talking about us. He said, the reason he came is to give us a rich and satisfying life. And what does that look like? Well, we looked at how Jesus referred to himself using a metaphor. He said, I'm like a good shepherd. And it's like he's leading us to goodness and love and forgiveness and blessing. But we are like sheep. Sometimes we kind of wander away with the crowd. Maybe we go the opposite way of the good life that he has for us. And we're not only led away at times by people, but we're led away by our self-destructive habits or our behaviors, or we're led astray by our unhealthy thinking. Sometimes we're led away from the good life because of our false beliefs. We believe things about ourselves that aren't true, or things about other people. Or some of us have beliefs about God that aren't true. And so we're not able to really step into the life of love and forgiveness and grace and truth that God has for us. So today we're going to look at another ingredient of the good life. We're going to talk about this, relationships. And let me share with you a relationship from my life. It's a friend of mine. His name is Steve. I've known him for about 20 years, actually. Here's a picture of us a few years ago, New Year's Eve. And this picture is really special to me because about 6-8 months before this picture were taken, Steve and I, our relationship was on the rocks. We didn't know what was going to happen next because there had been some miscommunication. There was kind of some breaches of trust and confidentiality. And it was kind of like, what are we going to do about this relationship? And it was a really, really tough season we went through. We were actually taking a walk 2 weeks ago in our neighborhood. We live near each other, and we were talking, and we weren't finished talking. We finished our walk, and we came up to my house, and I said, well, you want to come inside? And I realized I had locked myself out of the house, and I was like, well, you can't come in. He said, well, let's go sit in the backyard. I was a little nervous about that. The style aesthetic of my backyard, I would describe as post-apocalyptic, maybe, you know? And a couple of weeks ago, Pastor Joel, one of our pastors here, he gave a message talking about how friendships and relationships, being open to going to the next level in relationships, is a lot like front yards and backyards, right? We have our front yard, that's what we want people to see. And then our backyard, we put up fences. So I literally welcomed him into my backyard. And we went in my backyard, we sat down on this little swing we got back out there, and we just talked about our relationship. And we decided, hey, if we ever go through a rocky season again, or when we do, let's just be committed to working through that. Let's just assume we're going to have misunderstandings, there's going to be problems. And we both kind of made a commitment to each other to do that. Almost based on the idea that, you know, when you break a bone and then the bone heals, it's the broken part that healed that's actually stronger than every other part in the bone. And I think sometimes in relationships, we hit a rocky season, and instead of pushing through and finding the new relationship, we might pull back and say, well, maybe this isn't meant to be. And I think some of us miss out on really great, strong, long-term relationships because we miss out on doing that challenging relational work. If we're going to live the good life involves great relationships. In fact, that's what the research shows us. BYU did a study recently. They surveyed 300,000 people. They did this study, they called it Staying Alive. And basically they said that people with healthy relationships tend to live longer, handle stress better, and are more successful in accomplishing their goals because they have people that support them and they have people that hold them accountable. And conversely, when we have poor social relationships, it contributes to our health. That people that did not have strong social ties, it was actually more harmful to them long term than smoking and not exercising. So that's what the research tells us about relationships. But what we're going to talk about today is, what does Jesus tell us about relationships? We're going to look at some quotes from Jesus where he was talking to his friends about their relationship and what Jesus values in relationships. And what we're going to do is we're going to take these quotes and try to create kind of a principle that we can apply to the relationships in our lives. And I hope what we're going to see is this main idea, that by following Jesus, we can experience great relationships. Now, before I get into this, let me just say, though, that this is a tough topic for me, a challenging topic for me. Relationships are a mixed bag for me. I've had great relationships, and I've had relationships that were really tough. I think a lot of us bring a lot of expectations to relationships, usually not verbalized. And then when someone doesn't meet those expectations, we're disappointed, even though they didn't even know that we had those expectations of them. I've been disappointed by people and hurt by people, and I've disappointed people and hurt people. And all of us have different speeds of trust. Some of us trust quickly, some of us trust more slowly. So it's really good to just acknowledge up front, I'm not coming as a relationship expert. I'm coming as someone that is really working hard to have good relationships, and I'm looking for Jesus's teachings to help me do that. And maybe that's kind of the approach that we could all take and say, let's lean in, let's figure out what Jesus is saying, and then try to experience great relationships. So let's look at one of the first quotes from Jesus, probably one of the most powerful things that Jesus said about relationships. Here's what he said: "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." For Jesus, the key to great relationships was selflessness, was putting others first, which is totally radical, because a lot of us tend to base relationships on what that relationship provides for us. Do I think this is a good relationship? I don't know. What does it do for me? In fact, even that research that I just quoted you was all about how great relationships can help you. But Jesus was like, maybe the core of great relationships is about what we can provide for other people. It's about being available to people, not about us. Here's a principle that we could draw from that. Great relationships require selflessness. Now, it's a hard pill to swallow, because we live in a culture that says you deserve the best. You deserve the best things and all the greatest things, and it's all about you. It's all about me. Jesus is teaching the exact opposite. He's thinking it's about others. And when you think about it, when we think about the good life, I think we'd all agree the good life is really less about me getting everything I want. And it's really more about what can I do to make other people's lives better. It's really about giving ourselves away, selflessness. Now that sounds good, but the question is, what does it look like? What's the practical application for each one of us in different relationships? What do I need to do to become more selfless? Jesus is probably the best example to teach us this, because his whole life was about giving himself away. He sacrificed comfort and convenience. He gave up marriage, like the option of being married and raising a family. He gave up all those things so he could show sacrificial love and teach us to love one another. But what would it look like for us practically? I was thinking about this because last week I had a conversation with a friend of mine. His name is Jeff Frazier. Here's a picture of Jeff and I. And Jeff is a lead pastor at Chapel Street Church, which is a multi-site church in suburban Chicago. And Jeff asked me, he said, Jason, who do you want to be in 5 years? He didn't say, where do you want to be? You know, financially, career, health. He said, who do you want to be? And how will you get there? And it reminded me of this passage of scripture in the Bible that is like filled with relationship goals. That was written by Paul, one of Christianity's first missionaries. Christianity in the beginning days really struggled with relational cohesion because it was all about small groups of people getting together, growing with each other, learning together, loving one another, serving one another. And so there's a lot of relationship goal stuff in the New Testament. And so let me share with you this verse that I've been reading and rereading. He says, clothe yourselves with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. And that's been really sticking with me. Maybe you can think about some of the relationships in your life that could use improvement. And maybe in your mind you're thinking, yeah, here's something that person needs to work on. But maybe you should say, wait a minute, what are some things I need to work on? Maybe go through this list and just see if any of these things kind of percolates inside you. Are you tender-hearted or are you hard-hearted? Are you kind of like, well, they got to change. I've done enough. You know, are you kind of hard in your heart? How kind are you? When you talk to those people in relationships, are you kind of short? Are you kind of mean? Are you a little sarcastic? Got a little snarkiness to it? Are you kind? How about humility? Do you know what the problem? Look, I know what the problem is. I've got this handled. Humility says, maybe I'm seeing this wrong. Maybe I need to see this from another perspective. Maybe humility is one of those things that God wants you to work on. Gentleness. What about patience? Maybe you move quicker than that person is ready to move. And maybe you push a lot. And God's saying, hey, slow down a bit. Give them some space. Give them some time. He says, make allowance for each other's faults. I like that. When I think about that, I think of like a perimeter. Like if you got your stuff together, then you can be in this circle. But if you got to work on this thing, yeah, you're out here. You can straighten that out, and then you can get close to me. But what he's saying here is make allowance for people's faults. I got a guy in my life, he's like really negative. And he can be in here with that. He's working on that. I got people in my life, they allow for my faults. I'm always going to them going, hey man, I'm still working on this area. Thank you so much for tolerating this unfinished part of my life. Because they allow me in that relationship circle with all my faults. And he says, forgive anyone who offends you. Anybody been offended lately? Have you forgiven them? Anybody offended God lately? With anything? Anything you said, anything you did, anything you thought? I think we offend God all the time. And God's like, I forgive you. And what he's wanting is for us to truly internalize his love, his patience, his kindness, his gentleness, his humility, his forgiveness, his allowance for our faults. And as we take that in and God's doing that with us, then we can show that with other people. Right? Think about one of those relationships in your life, and who do you want to be in 5 years? Who do you want to be next week? How can you become more selfless in your relationships? Rather than what is this relationship doing for me, what can you do for that relationship. That's one of the most powerful things that Jesus said about relationships. Being able to lay down our life for someone else. And Jesus did that for us, literally. Now he's asking us to do that for others. If that wasn't enough, here's something else that Jesus says about relationships. He said this when he was meeting with his friends. He said, I've called you friends. Why? For everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. What was Jesus saying? I'm calling you my friend because I opened up to you. I shared with you what I know. I shared with you who I am. Our lives, our culture, social media encourages us to have tens and hundreds and thousands of really superficial relationships where we show people kind of a sliver of our lives. And we've usually, put a filter on it, and we've chosen all the parts of our lives, and we say, I'm going to show people this part of my life or these parts of our lives. But for Jesus, friendship and relationship comes with openness, of showing who we truly are. And maybe a leader, like a principle that we can get from this is this: great relationships grow with openness. Now, for some of you, that might be tough because you might have grown up in environments where being open is not safe. You learned very early on not to say what you really think or who you really feel, or don't tell people who you really are because you'll be judged. Some of you grew up in churches where you're like, I can't be myself or they'll kick me out. But Jesus is wanting us to experiment with openness. He did. It was risky, but he did it. He said, everything the Father's told me I've shared with you. I'm going to share my life with you. I was kind of experimenting with this recently. I was in our life group, and we're trying to get connected and know each other. And people know things about me, and I share certain things about myself. But I said, I need to share something about my life that people don't know. And maybe something that I'd be kind of uncomfortable sharing. So I was like, what could I share about myself? So I decided to share something that I do. Here's the technical term for it, is mercatio Bacchorum. It's in Latin. And some of you are wondering what that is. Looks like a drink. Hey, would you like mercatio Bacchorum? No, thank you, please, yeah. It's not a drink. It's a Latin term for cheek biting and lip biting. It's classified as a repetitive body behavior. And by cheek biting and lip biting, I don't mean, I'm not saying I'm being coy, like, that's not what it is. It's, stress, and I learned it early on, and I'll bite the inside of my mouth and actually create lesions in there. It's really unhealthy, it's very painful, but it's something that I've done, and I was embarrassed about it, and it's been kind of like a secret that I don't let people know about. And so I decided to share it with my life group and just kind of say, look, this is part of who I am, what I struggle with. And they were so great about hearing that and responding to me. In fact, let me share with you 3 pieces of advice of how to respond when someone opens up about something personal and vulnerable in their life, okay? And this is based on how they responded to me. 3 pieces of advice, here they are. 1, listen to understand, not agree. When someone opens up about something personal in their life, you don't have to decide whether you agree with them. Oh, I don't agree with that at all. Or yeah, I'm totally a fan of that. Yeah. Sometimes we feel like we have to have an opinion. When someone opens up about something personal in their life, the best thing we can do is just try to understand what they're saying. We don't have to come to a conclusion about it or give advice about it. Here's the second thing. Express gratitude. You can say something like, thank you so much for sharing that with me. That must have been difficult to say. Just expressing gratitude that they opened up. That always feels good when we put ourselves out there and someone's thankful for it. And here's the third one. Affirm the relationship. When I opened up, one of the people said, "You know what? It really means a lot to me that you felt trusting enough to share that with me." So you can affirm the relationship. I think when we take a relational risk, when we step out and share something from our personal life and open up, I think what we want is it to lead to more relationship. I think when we're on the listening side of somebody opening up, we need to make sure every conversation ends with an open door, not a closed door. And I think we'd be better off as a culture if we learn to hear and understand each other rather than deciding whether or not we agree or disagree. And this is a very important thing. When someone opens up to you about something that you disagree with, or that you're triggered by, or it hits on one of those topics that you love having an opinion about, we have to remember we're there to engage with people and not get sidetracked on the topic. That's how we build relational trust. And it doesn't have to be just the bad stuff. It can be the good stuff. When somebody says, "Hey, I want to share with you, I'm thinking about going back to school. I'm thinking about retiring. Hey, I have this dream job that I want to get." Or I'm thinking about dating again. You know, it could be wonderful things. It could be good things that people are sharing. And Jesus lived that kind of life. Jesus not only opened up with his followers and said things like, "I'm lonely." At one point, he got to that place and he was saying, at the end of his life, he was in the Garden of Gethsemane right before he went to the cross. And he said, "I am sorrowful. I'm depressed to the point of death." And don't we need to be there for each other when we're feeling that down and that lonely? But Jesus also said, "Here's who I am. Here's what I've come to do. Here's my mission." In fact, one of my favorite stories in the Bible is when Jesus took 3 of his closest friends. They went up on a hill, and it says that Jesus was transfigured before them. See, Jesus was God in the flesh, but most of the time when you interacted with Jesus, you just saw a 30-something Middle Eastern guy kind of walking around. But Jesus took his friends up on the hill, and then he revealed his divine identity. And they looked and they saw, this is God in the flesh. And what was he doing? He was showing his true self to his closest friends. I have a Greek icon in my office hanging on the wall, and it represents this story in the Bible. There's a reference if you want to look it up for yourself. And I look at this icon and I'm just reminded that Jesus is continually wanting me to see who he truly is. And helping me see who he truly is so that I can show him who I truly am, and then he can help me show other people who I truly am. And I can accept and love them. That's the powerful relationship that Jesus wants us to have in our lives. Now, I say, relationships grow through openness. Some of you are like, so I'm supposed to give my deep dark secrets to my Uber driver and everybody? No, I'm not saying everybody, not everybody's the same. I just finished reading this book by John Townsend called People Fuel. And the book is all about how relationships are a key to living the thriving life that God has for us. So we need to work on those. And he gives a list of different kinds of relationships. I'll share a few with you. He talks about how in our life we have coaches. These are the people we open up to so that they can coach us and speak into our lives. It could be professionally, it could be mentors, it could be counselors, things like that. Then he talks about comrades. These are the people that are the people that we're doing life with. Our openness is usually reciprocal. I'll share my life with you, you share your life with me, and then we'll help each other. We talked about this a few weeks ago as kind of your core 4. Who are the people that you're really doing life with? Then the next one are casuals. This is where we have a lot of relationships. You know a lot of people. You might not go powerfully in depth with all of them, but you're trying to be as open as you can with a lot of people. Most of us can handle about 3 or 4 or 5 deeper core relationships, but then we should know a lot of people and have connections with a lot of people. And then there's colleagues, our work partners. Research shows that when people are in good relationship with people they work with, that they thrive. Our core relationships, Townsend says, probably shouldn't be our work relationships, because we also have things like performance reviews and job evaluations, and sometimes we work for a job for a period of time and then we leave and we go to another job, and so there's changes in that. But we should be always working on our relationships with others at work. Then we have what's called care receivers. These are the people we're caring for. They might be more open with us than we are with them. But we are caring for them. And then he actually lists two more groups that I didn't put up on here. He talks about chronics and contaminants. And he said, you only want a couple of these people in your life. And these are the people that you love, but with boundaries. And then these are the people we try not to be like. We have to say, wait a minute, am I a chronic or a contaminant in someone's life? How is it that I can work on being more relationally healthy so that I can have great relationships and live the good life? Now, I like these distinctions because a lot of times when we talk about relationships, especially in churches, people think marriage, or they think who I'm dating at the moment. That isn't who Jesus was talking about when he was talking to his friends. Jesus never married. He never had a family of his own. He was talking about our relationships with one another. And I think that's important, because I think what he was saying is, wouldn't it be great if we could partner with each other on the spiritual journey together and do the hard work of having a great relationship? And it reminds me of a quote that I got from Tim Keller. And he was talking about kind of what it means to be in great relationships. And he said, if you're in a great relationship, here's the kind of thing that you say to each other. You say, I'm excited about your future, and I want to be part of getting you there. I'm signing up for the journey with you. Would you sign up for the journey to my true self with me? It's going to be hard, but I want to get there. Now, if you're married, gosh, it'd be great if you're not able to say this kind of thing, if you could move in the direction of being able to say this. But wouldn't it be great if we could say this to our friends? Wouldn't the world be a really, less lonely place if we were able to say this kind of stuff? If we could partner with each other and work through the relational challenges at work, at home, in our friendship circles, in our neighborhoods, if we could have a bigger vision for relational health, it could be the best relationship you're going to be in is the one you're in conflict with right now. Can you catch a vision for inviting God into your heart and mind in a new way? And maybe that means opening up about your life. I spoke with somebody just last week, and we were kind of working through something in our lives, and it was a challenging thing. And this person opened up to me and said something about his history and said, here's something I went through years ago. And it just flicked a switch. And suddenly I understood him differently. And he understood himself differently. And we started talking about that because there was vulnerability and there was openness. How can you grow in openness in your relationships? Think about a relationship in a particular relationship in your life. Does God want you to be growing in selflessness, growing in openness? What would that look like? Here's one more quote. We're going to wrap it up. Here's one more quote from Jesus. He said this to his friends. You didn't choose me, I chose you. I like that. They're like, I'll follow you anywhere. Yeah, I actually chose you first. Jesus is always one-upping. Jesus, I love you. Yeah, I loved you first. Jesus is always intentionally reaching out to us first. He's modeling what God's love looks like for us. God pursues us. And that's the transformative power that Jesus wants to give us in our relationships. If we could understand God's love for us, his patience, his forgiveness, his gentleness, his kindness, his guidance for us, if we can understand that, then we can pass that into our other relationships. In fact, we have this quote because John, one of Jesus' close friends, wrote that quote down after Jesus said, I can imagine John writing it down. Jesus says, you didn't choose me, I chose you. And John's like, oh, that's a good one. And he's writing it down. I got to keep that one. And then later, John wrote a letter to his friends kind of explaining this out a little bit more. Here's what John said. He said, we love each other. Why? Because he loved us first. Our ability to love one another should come from our ability to understand how loved we are. My ability to forgive and make room for faults comes from my understanding that God forgives me and makes room for my faults. I can be gentle because he's gentle with me. And I need reminders on that. We need to work toward relational health. But it really does come from that. And you might be visiting with us. Maybe you're new to church. Maybe you're just kind of checking it out. Here's what we want you to know. God loves you. And you're here probably because God actually arranged for you to be here to be able to hear this. You say, I chose to go to church this morning. Jesus is like, actually, I chose for you to go to church this morning because I want you to hear that I love you so much, and I want you to live a rich and satisfying life filled with great relationships, and it starts with a relationship with me. That's what Jesus is saying. And if you don't have a relationship with Jesus, would you stay after? If you're interested, we want to talk with you. You can head out to our Next Steps area outside. We'd love to tell you more about what that looks like. And then for the rest of us, really, if you're following Jesus, here's a radical statement. Followers of Jesus should be the most relationally healthy people. And I don't think we are. I think we got stuff to work on. So you know what? Let's do this. Let's work on having great relationships that are really based in understanding Jesus' love for us. And let's work on being selfless, and let's work on growing in openness and loving one another. And I think it'll transform our lives, it'll transform our church, it'll transform our community, definitely transform the world. We're going to wrap up our service now. Would you stand with me at Torrance? Would you stand? Thank you so much for being here. Next week, we're going to be talking about another key ingredient of the good life. So we want to encourage you to be part of that. If you're new with us, again, thank you so much for being here. We hope this was meaningful and significant for you. If you have something on your heart that you'd like prayer about, you want somebody to talk to, we're going to have prayer team people here to be able to meet with you. On your way out, we're receiving a special offering. It's called our Fellowship Fund. It's a special offering we take for people in this church that are going through financial crisis. If you're part of Journey of Faith, we invite you to give generously to that to help them. And if you want to get involved in a life group or find out more about a walk with Jesus, head to our Next Steps area after the service. Thanks so much for coming. Let me close this in prayer. Gracious God, thank you so much for your love for us. Thank you for your grace in our lives. Thank you that by following you, we can have great relationships. Help us to continue to work on our relationship with you and allow your love for us to impact everyone around us. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you, everybody. See you next week.